Sometimes things just slow down in video games, and the last fortnight has basically been that. There's nothing really world-shaking, no thunderous tidings of any sort. Things have just basically been ticking by. Hi, I'm Rob, and welcome to Gossip News, and today we're kicking off with kind of the biggest story of the year so far, which is unions within video games. And as people are probably already aware, Raven Software were unionized. Activision Blizzard were not happy about it. They're the first official AAA games union within video games, and I am all for that. I support them wholeheartedly, and I hope this movement spreads. But what surprised me is that support for unions within video games has come in from various angles, and I know that Activision Blizzard has really tried hard to prevent Raven Software's union going ahead, and even now still want to stop it becoming a formal thing. They want to dumb it down, they want to crush it, whatever they can do to get rid of it. And they're not the only ones. There are other developers, other publishers out there who do not want unions within video games. But there are some voices that are in support of video games, some very large voices. One of them is Reggie Fils-Aimé, formerly of Nintendo. He's come out and said that video games as a medium, developers and publishers should embrace unions. Another big voice that's come out in support of unions, and this one will probably piss Activision Blizzard off a lot, is Phil Spencer. He has come forward and said that he will recognize Raven Software's union after the purchase of Activision Blizzard closes. During an internal all-hands meeting with Xbox Game Studios employees last Thursday, Phil Spencer, the head of Xbox, said that he would recognize Raven Software's union. According to Kotaku, who verified the quote from a video taken of Xbox's remote all-hands meeting, Phil Spencer said, "Once the deal closes, we would absolutely support an employees' organization that's in place. We think it is a right of employees and something that can be a part of a relationship between a company and people who work at the company." Spencer stresses that Microsoft does not currently have a relationship with the Communication Workers of America, nor the union Game Workers Alliance, which is right and proper because the deal hasn't been finalized. But once the deal closes, they will recognize the union. Now that is probably the worst thing that Activision Blizzard directors and executives and Bobby Kotick wanted to hear. And more voices are coming forward in support of unionization within video games in order to get rid of horrible practices, to level the playing field. Unions are a good thing for video games, which has never had them. Anyway, it's interesting because Microsoft previously said that they didn't object to Activision Blizzard's recognition of the Raven Union, but now Phil Spencer's come forward and categorically acknowledged Raven Software's union, and in a sense acknowledged that unions are coming to video games. So there's not really much anyone can do about it. It's going to be a bumpy ride for all the fat cats within video games from now on. Anyway, staying with Microsoft for a second, we mentioned that sometime last year, Microsoft announced that they were going to be doing some kind of Fire Stick-esque dongle type thing for cloud streaming games. So, we have some more details about the device itself thanks to Windows Central. They have confirmed that the streaming device was codenamed Keystone. And this is where things get a little bit interesting, because the codename pertains to a modernized HDMI streaming service that runs Xbox Game Pass and its cloud gaming service. But what Microsoft are doing is taking the time to explore iterations of the product before bringing it to market. So even though these rumors have persisted for a while now, Microsoft are still playing their cards pretty close to their chest. I think what they want to do is avoid what happened with Stadia, where there was a big hue and cry, a big presentation, and then just gone. Stadia flunked. Now, according to a spokesperson from Microsoft, our vision for Xbox cloud gaming is unwavering. Our goal is to enable people to play the games they want, on the devices they want, anywhere they want. As announced last year, we've been working on a game streaming device codenamed Keystone that could connect to any TV or monitor without the need for a console. The spokesperson goes on to say, as part of any technical journey, we are constantly evaluating our efforts, reviewing our learnings, and ensuring we are bringing value to our customers. We have made the decision to pivot away from the current iteration of the Keystone device. We will take our learnings and refocus our efforts on a new approach that will allow us to deliver Xbox cloud gaming to more players around the world in the future. Now, it's obvious from that Microsoft have been developing their cloud gaming stuff for a number of years now. And I, for one, am happy that they're taking their time with it and not rushing a product to market that is incomplete or doesn't do what they want it to do. If their goal is to have everybody accessing cloud gaming whenever, wherever, on whatever device, then it needs to be something on the level of the Fire Stick. It needs to be as simple as that, and it needs to be as robust as that. And don't get me wrong, Amazon's Fire Stick didn't work properly right out the box. They took a couple of years to be refined, and even now, you still get issues with them. You'll still get glitches and bugs and stuff. That's just technology. But if they can get it to that kind of level with cloud streaming for games, that is going to be one of the biggest game changers in the industry. So watch this space. We will keep you informed. Moving on to the other big news story of 2022, which is NFTs. And I know everybody keeps saying that they don't want NFTs within video games. I hate to say this to all of the video games journalists and people like that who want NFTs out of games, and all of the gamers themselves who want NFTs out of video games. But you're up against big business, and no matter how much you want something to happen, it probably isn't going to happen the way you want. Because at the end of the day, these companies only care about making money. They don't care about you. Now, if you boycott a company and you hit them with their bottom line, you hit them in the wallet, then yes, you can make them care. But how many gamers are going to show that kind of activism? So, where does that leave us? Well, that leaves us with NFTs coming back into video games, but not in the way that you thought they were going to be. I said this a while ago. I said, you might not get NFTs in mainstream video games, but they will end up in mainstream video games one way or another. That is because companies want them. And a lot of people do not agree with me. And you know what? I can understand from their perspective, it's not something that they want in video games. But I tend to steer away from idealism, and I tend to focus on the reality of the situation. And the reality of the situation right now is, well, let's give you an example. You know that new No Kuni game? The one by Netmarble? That's on mobile? Well, guess what? Netmarble did a report on their site about their future blockchain plans, and No Kuni, the mobile game, and 2 other games have been included as part of their future blockchain plans, which includes possible NFTs. Netmarble already have one game in which blockchain has been implemented, which is called A3, Still Alive, and it's an MMO from 2020. Now, according to the report, a new dungeon called Interion was added to A3 Still Alive. Users can get Interion ore and convert it for the game token Interium, ITU. Interium will be able to convert into MBX, the key currency of Netmarble's blockchain ecosystem. The report goes on to say, in line with A3 Still Alive, No Kuni Crossworlds users will be able to acquire in-game currencies by hunting in a particular field or dungeon and exchanging them for individual game tokens and MBX. So here's my question to all of you who don't want NFTs and blockchain within video games. How are you going to stop it? If you really don't want something in video games, you're going to have to fight for it. And this is where the key thing is. I think this report from Netmarble kind of highlights just how video games publishers and developers can go about introducing blockchain and NFTs into video games in mainstream ways. And that is because a lot of them are now focusing on mobile games. You name me one publisher that doesn't have a department for mobile games that isn't growing. And the reason for that is because there are a lot of things that you can get away with within mobile games because people don't pay attention to them. Especially gamers. Mobile games is something that gamers still regard as not real games, which is utter nonsense. So here's a question for you all. Gamers and publishers and developers, how can they all come together to find a compromise that everybody's happy with? And what could that compromise look like? Ideas would be nice. Speaking of things that gamers don't want in video games, loot boxes are back in the conversation. 18 countries have apparently backed a report calling for loot box regulations, and a document dubbing the practice as exploitative shares proposals on how the industry can improve in-game transactions. Now, this is from the Norwegian Consumer Council, who has released a new report on the ongoing impact of loot boxes on the games industry, and it's backed by 20 consumer groups in 18 European countries. The report gives an outline of the history of monetization in video games and how practices around loot boxes and in-game currency have evolved, especially on the mobile side. How they've influenced mainstream games from the mobile side, and how developers and publishers have basically been exploiting people with these practices. Some of them are very, very shady, some of them are very dodgy. The report does highlight deceptive design in games, along with tricks that exploit cognitive or behavioral biases to incentivize spending. Loot boxes are also frequently marketed aggressively by advertising the possible rewards, which is also considered deceptive by the report. There were 2 case studies that the report focused on that had particularly predatory practices, and those were FIFA 22 and Raid Shadow Legends. Now, the former, we already knew that EA was facing massive amounts of criticism for the predatory practices inherent within their sports games, especially FIFA. The thing that I want to know is, what are all those YouTubers who get sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends going to do now? Will they turn down the sponsorship? Because if the game is found to have predatory practices that encourage what is effectively gambling, how can you, in good conscience, accept a sponsorship from that particular organization, especially if you are a channel that is child-friendly? Just throwing this out there. Anyway, the report rounds up by listing several actions that the industry and its regulators can take to improve the landscape around loot boxes. These actions include banning the aforementioned deceptive design, denoting all in-game purchases in real-world currency, not implementing loot boxes in games aimed at minors, more transparency around algorithms that determine the outcome of a purchase, and more enforcement around consumer rights in games. The report also adds that if these remedies do not alleviate the issue, the industry should consider a ban of paid loot boxes in games altogether. Now, these conversations around loot boxes have been going on since 2013, and they're not going to end anytime soon, because although the report has made these recommendations and they are being supported in their findings by 18 European countries and 20 organizations, it is not the law. And I want to make that clear. As long as it is not a legal thing, as long as they are not breaking the law, then companies like EA and Activision Blizzard and various others will exploit this one way or another. They will find a way to do it, and they'll probably do it through mobile games. Again, just like with the NFTs. Diablo Immortal isn't getting sold in Belgium or the Netherlands, 2 of the countries that signed up to this report, and it's because of their laws on loot boxes. Now, what does that tell you about Diablo Immortal before you've even played the game? It's going to be loot box heavy. There are mechanics in there that are highly questionable and are designed to make Activision Blizzard money, and designed to basically treat you like a cash cow and milk you for all you're worth. Now that I know that, I won't be touching Diablo Immortal. Now, according to the Diablo Immortal subreddit, a Blizzard employee has said, unfortunately players in Netherlands and Belgium will not be able to install Diablo Immortal due to the country's gambling restrictions. The loot boxes in the game are against the law in your country, so unless the gambling restrictions change, the game will not be released in the Netherlands and Belgium. The employee then warned against trying to download the game from another region's app store, stating, "It would be illegal for you to download the game in another country like France. If you manage to run the game, I cannot guarantee that you will not be banned for it." Which, I'm sorry, but there's a slight element of holding you hostage over the game in that. You know, it's not our fault you can't play the game. It's your country's gambling laws that you can't play the game. So if you want to blame someone, blame your politicians that you can't play this game. Am I reading that wrong? Or does it really sound like that? So yeah, I won't be touching Diablo Immortal. In fact, I don't really touch any Activision Blizzard games these days. I've basically cut them out of my life. Until Bobby Kotick and the directors are gone, I won't be playing any Activision Blizzard games. I think that more people need to do the same thing. Vote with your wallet, people. Anyway, leaving that to one side, we're going to talk a little bit about EA, because everyone's been talking about this story, so I'm not going to dwell too long on it. EA reportedly had acquisition talks with NBC Universal, Amazon, Apple, and Disney. Apparently, in recent years, they have been fairly persistent in pursuing a potential sale of the company to another bigger company. Now, I can understand within video games, and indeed within any industry, there is a certain safety in being sheltered by a much bigger company, and that is something that a lot of companies now are recognizing. It's better to be part of the forest than to be a tree on its own. But who's big enough to buy EA? Well, you've heard some of them, NBC Universal, Amazon, Apple, Disney. People being people, a lot of them focused on Apple buying EA, thinking, oh, that's going to be the big thing, that's the big story, Apple wants to buy EA. Not quite how it goes, because EA still haven't been sold to anyone. I think Amazon would be a better fit for EA than Apple or Disney or anyone else. Now, I admit Disney could do a deal with EA because there is the Star Wars link, but they already broke that link by opening Star Wars up to other companies. So that might not be the best option for EA. Whereas Amazon, they already want to take part in video games. They're looking for somebody that they can simply take over and hit the ground running. EA would be a good option, and they do have the money. Who do you think would be a good fit with EA? Given their IP, given their portfolio, who do you think, as a corporation, would be good enough and have the clout and capabilities to make something of all of the titles that EA holds and all of the intellectual property that EA holds? And who could take EA to the next level of being a publisher? Moving on to Sony, who have released a document that details their strategy for the coming years. This is a business segment briefing for shareholders, and it's called PlayStation: The Road to Profitable Transformation. Now, I am going to link the document in the description below. Within that document, there are multiple declarations like the PS5 would be Sony's biggest platform ever, and Sony's group collaborations like the Uncharted movie and a Deathloop Madison Beer remix would build brand relevancy. According to the document, Sony estimates that live service games will be the dominant form of gaming by 2025, with just over half of all gamers, on Sony platforms anyway, playing live service games of some sort. Another aspect that Sony believe is that by 2025, 50% of their revenue is going to come from PC and mobile games. Sony also believe that they are going to be investing in new IPs and that PlayStation Plus is going to take off in a massive way because of the things that it's offering. Now, I'll be honest, the jury is still out for me with regards to PlayStation Plus. With regards to live service games, I'm not sure how much leverage Sony can make with that, and they reckon that they're going to make $300 million with PC games over the next year, given that they made about $80 million last year, which might be fair. I don't know what titles Sony has coming out on PC. So, given that Sony are in the process of finalizing the deal with Bungie and that they'll have another live service game that way, and that they're in the process of adapting a bunch of their games for PC, so they'll have more titles coming out on that platform, and they have other things coming out on mobile, what do you think of Sony's future plans? I put it to you. Have a read of the roadmap. Tell me what you think. Do you think Sony's on the right track? Do you think Sony are going to introduce some curveballs that people aren't expecting? I am really curious to find out what people think about all of this. Anyway, one of the things that kind of was in the roadmap but also wasn't is that Sony have confirmed that God of War, Horizon and Gran Turismo are all up for adaptation. God of War and Horizon have both been snapped up by Amazon and Netflix respectively, so they're probably going to end up being TV shows. But Gran Turismo looks like it's going to be a movie, and Sony are eyeing up director Neil Blomkamp to helm that particular project. Given how the Uncharted movie turned out, do you think it's wise that Sony wants to put so much into adapting video game properties for another medium? There are good video game adaptations out there, I'm not saying there aren't, but they need to be well thought out, they need to be well realised. Moving on to our final news story, and Embracer Group, who've been going around buying up all sorts of developers and publishers like crazy. Recently, Embracer Games Archive was launched, and Embracer Group announced that their game preservation initiative had begun, and the stated goal is to archive and save as much of the video games industry as possible. I honestly think this is a noble effort, and I think it's good that Embracer Group are actually taking this on and, pardon the phrasing, embracing preservation of video games. I do think it's a damn shame that companies like Nintendo and others like them fail to do the same thing. Now, so far, the Embracer Games Archive has collected 50,000 games, consoles and accessories in its vault in Sweden, and the team consists of a CEO, archivist, assistant, technical engineer and supply manager. Currently, the collection is not accessible to the public or researchers, but the initiative has started its plans on building out a database of its collection and making it available as a resource to academics, researchers, and, at least to some degree, the general public. Even though the collection is not accessible to the public yet, I imagine someday it will be, and I would love to go and visit it on that day when it opens, because a lot of those games that I imagine they've got in their archive are games that I would recognise from when I was a kid. So, nostalgia over, and that is also the end of this episode. Do let us know what you think of the stories that we covered today in the comments below. I am always interested in hearing what everyone thinks. You can catch me again on the next episode of Gossip News, when I will be talking about something from today's set of news, but I'll be exploring it in more detail. Until then, thanks for watching.